the view from Mount Nebo, I heard gravel being thrown under our big Mercedes travel bus as it cautiously pulled off the narrow Jordanian two-lane road. And next I heard our tour leader say, "Come, let's climb this mountain." Moses was an extraordinary leader, legendary in every respect, a man of selfless dedication, the man who had dazzled Egypt's Pharaoh, the man who had the devil nipping at his feet and danger staring him in the face. The Jewish people remember him as being the premier lawgiver of all history. And those of us who read the Bible recall that he was a person so trusted by God that he would once dare to ask if he could see the divine's face. And yet, with all of that, Moses was very human. I don't know of all of the mistakes that he made in his life. However, the Bible records several. And I suspect that being human, he made many more. One of those mistakes was of such crucial dimension that he paid for it on the day of his death. Now, it's been my experience in my 55 years that most of our mistakes, most of our sins are of such a nature that we can redeem part of them and what is lost. In some instances, we can even gain more than was lost, and praise be to God for that. However, some of our human errors, some of our sins that occur in life cannot fully be remedied on this earth. At least that's what happened to Moses. Moses' error, his sin was that he lost control. He became exceedingly angry. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. It was about day 2 of the 3-week tour, the study tour of Egypt, Jordan, and Israel this summer, that I acquired a newfound admiration for Moses. Like Moses, our tour leader was single-minded. He wanted nothing more than to take us from out of Egypt, through Sinai, into Jordan, and then into the promised land of Israel. He, like Moses, wanted us to see God's hand everywhere around us. George, like Moses, wanted us to trust and to depend upon God's faithful sustenance every step of the way. George had provided pre-trip instructions as well as day-of-trip instructions about this new way of living on the faithful reliance and unquestioning trust in the appointed leader. I'm not sure if Moses had that heart-to-heart talk with the people of Israel before they left the land of Goshen, but he should have. The similarities to George and Moses were numerous, and the similarities to our travel group and the children of Israel also numerous. We were expected to follow our leader and not to wander off to the left and not to wander off to the right. We were expected to eat food when it appeared and to drink water when it was provided. And we were encouraged constantly to be thankful to God all along the journey. But we weren't. Our group grumbled about the seeming lack of itinerary. We grumbled about not being told whether we should wear our sandals or whether we should wear our hiking boots. We even grumbled when our stomachs grumbled. In fact, my wife Nancy, I hope she will forgive me for this, who has rarely, I need to tell you this, has rarely been known to ever complain, murmured. She politely complained one day that she was not being provided enough water. And then that's when it occurred to me that George and Moses had a tough job. Our Christian tour group at times could have passed as bona fide children of Israel. Now, those original Israelites were of such a difficult and unappreciated congregation as any leader has ever been called to serve. And in like manner, our study group whined a bit, fussed some, and complained a bit. I even recall catching myself complaining. I openly protested one day about the detestable taste of the Israeli water. I said, why, oh, why couldn't we have brought more water from Egypt? Whoa, then it hit me. Moses had an impossible task. At least George was being paid. Now, while our group leader, George, had capable lieutenants, Moses at times did not. His brother Aaron, his prime associate, a few places along the trek, wasn't all that helpful. For instance, you may remember the time that Moses was on Mount Sinai getting a valuable message, so valuable that it was inscribed on stone. When Moses got back from his mountaintop tour, he found Aaron had allowed the travelers to transfer their religious allegiance to a golden calf. That was one day. Within a short time after that, Moses went through the misfortune of sending a committee to spy out the land toward which they were marching, the promised land. And the committee brought back a pessimistic report that caused a rebellion. Yeah, a rebellion. Right there in the midst of God's promised people. Come with me. Let's listen in on Numbers chapter 14 on what occurred that evening in camp. Numbers 14:1. That night, all the people of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in the desert. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land only to die by the sword? Our wives and our children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" That's what they said to each other. We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. And do you recall what Moses did? He did the same thing my dad did once. Like Moses, it was one of the worst days of his life. Early in that morning, my mother and father had confronted each other in a court of law, and their divorce was now final. I remember hearing my dad take solace in the fact that at least he would still be able to raise his children. We drove home that morning in absolute silence. And although I was only 13 years old, I wanted desperately to tell my dad that everything was going to be okay. But by the frown on his face, I wasn't sure. I deeply wanted to tell him he had nothing more to worry about. I was even ready to promise that the next time I heard the lawnmower, I wouldn't run and hide. But by the looks of his dejected countenance, I knew I should just be quiet. All 12 miles home, I thought about what I could possibly do to bring him cheer. We arrived home only to find that in his haste to leave the house, he had locked the keys inside. And so, reluctantly choosing a window of least importance and cost, he broke it. It's kind of funny the things you remember. I remember being the first time watching my dad bleed. About that time, with his handkerchief wrapped around his hand, the next door neighbor gleefully skipped across the street, and she had in her hand a tuna casserole dinner. And she rattled off the instructions of how long to thaw, how long to heat, how long before you're supposed to take the little foil on top and make it like a tent and then sprinkle those little onion things on top. And I knew that had my mom been there, she would know what to do. But by my dad's past cooking endeavors, I knew that we would be eating sandwiches that evening. When our neighbor left, I could tell he was just about to shed tears. Standing there, like many soldiers I had heard him talk about in World War II with that 1,000-yard stare, all the while holding that frozen fish dish. What could I possibly do to bring him happiness? And suddenly it came to me. I'll make him dessert. He loved puddings.